Hello! Today's episode of Are You Still Working is presented by me, Lisa Madden. Usually I'm producing and editing, but today is a special episode where I wanted to interview Courtney, and she can hardly interview herself. Though I wouldn't put it past her, there's not much she can't do. So here we go. Courtney Collins is a writer and producer. Her debut novel, The Burial, was based on the real-life story of a female bushranger in the Hunter Valley. It was nominated for a bunch of prestigious awards, including the Stella Prize and the New South Wales Premier's Award for New Writing. It was published in 10 countries and is being developed into a feature film by Pure Pictures. Her second novel, Bird, was published by Hachette and hit the shelves this year. Courtney lived in Ngukurr in the remote Northern Territory for 8 years, where she produced short films and animation in community. She's currently working on a PhD, working against whiteness and creative literary production. She lives on Gumbaynggirr country on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, but today we're on Gadigal and Wangal country in Sydney. Courtney. One of the things that I love about this podcast is finding out how people motivate themselves when they set their own agenda. It's really trained out of us through school and what have you. We're so used to following instructions. You've been doing this for many years. You've even said that you're addicted to working in this way. How do you motivate yourself when no one is telling you what to do?
So, because it's you, I only want to tell you the truth. And the truth is motivation, discipline have nothing to do with it. It doesn't enter the room. So I have to motivate myself to clean the windows, but I don't have to motivate myself to write or make things. It's as necessary as breathing. There's no friction. And I guess what I'm learning now is that the discipline is in not doing it. The discipline is in actually having time away from it to, be inspired, to rest, to synthesize ideas, to take care of my physical body, which doesn't love sitting at a desk all day. So the motivation is it's no work. There's no work involved in getting there. It's so life-giving, really, that it is addictive in that way. There's parts of the process that I guess I feel more naturally adept to, and other parts I've learned to love. Yeah.
Wow.
That's the truth.
So what gets in the way then?
Of doing the work? There's a practicality around keeping a roof over your head, paying the bills. That's a pressure that the work doesn't always answer to. It can be very boom and bust. And if you want to set yourself on a surefire track to be broke, write a novel and do a PhD. It takes enormous amounts of space and time. I've kind of coached myself to let go of some material aspirations that would really get in the way. And I guess, the way that Jude and I choose to live is fairly minimal, and we live in the bush and we try and grow our own food, and, that in itself takes labour, but it is such a fine balance to achieve, to not feel the pressure of that and the anxiety of that. Yeah.
Amazing. I always sensed that self-doubt wasn't a big deal for you, but now I kind of feel like it's confirmed that it's just flowing out no matter what.
Well, the self-doubt, if there's doubt, it's around if I take money or material possessions as a measure of success, I would be full of doubt because it doesn't always equate to that. But if I take experience, pleasure, ideas, relationships as a measure of success, I feel abundant.
You're a very rich woman.
I'm a very rich woman.
Very prosaic here. Do you have a very set schedule for your days?
Well, the project is the guide, and there was a period not so long ago where I was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and just feeling like I was so smart and so spooky at that hour, and that fades when the sun comes up. And it was such a productive, important time for the book. I could find something in those hours, but because, I want to keep functioning and functional in my bigger life, that meant I had to be in bed by about 8 o'clock. And as in my house, it has outside walls, but there's no interior walls except for the bathroom. So sharing with Jude and Valley, our dog, we all have to find a rhythm together. So now, my routine is that I get up at 6 o'clock, I have a coffee, I get to the desk, and I love those early magic hours. It's a slipstream for me. If I get to the desk too late in the day, I'm just hating on myself because the cogs are just whirring more slowly.
That's about knowing yourself and knowing your own rhythms and being able to connect to the times when you're most likely to be productive.
It is. I guess it's also experimenting and knowing that the body changes and that at different times the project will ask different things and require a different energy.
Amazing. How do you know that an idea is the one? As a creative person, I'm sure you're having lots of ideas all the time. How do you kind of distinguish between one that you think has legs and others that might not?
I think it's not so much trusting an idea, because an idea, in my experience, morphs. You think you're writing about one thing, you end up being taken far, far down that road. So the trust is in the process. I trust the process. And by that, I mean, when I sit down to write, I don't always know what I'm going to write about. I don't completely map out the story. I'm putting myself in a place, in a headspace of being open to discover. And I'm really interested in what wants to come through. And I trust that what wants to come through, maybe I have to kind of rise to that it may be a bit ahead of me in terms of my capability, my sense of the world, my sense of myself. It pushes you out towards the unknown. That's what's interesting about it. And I think it's important that I remain true to that process because I want the reader to experience the novelty and surprise of that discovery in the way that I felt it as well.
Are you able to give an example of that?
Sure. So in the second novel, which is called The Walkman Mix, in one telling that could look like a complete failure in the sense of a lot of time spent, I years ago submitted it to my publisher at the time and she hated it. And it felt like a terrible setback. It felt devastating. So I lost confidence in it as a story. In my mind, I put it on ice. I didn't abandon it. I just was like, don't quite know what to do with you. And I trotted off and wrote another book, which had its own energy that I was just kind of running behind, really. So what happened in letting it rest or putting it on ice is that it solved itself in the way that I know crisply, clearly how to finish that book now. And for me, that means I'll go to Ireland. There's parts of it that are set in Dublin. So I need to be in that place and write on that country. And it's so exciting because in trusting the process, maybe there were things in my life that had to occur for me to really know what the hell that story was about. But it's led me back to it. It hasn't answered itself. I've been a willing participant, but I'm trusting where it's taking me.
That's a great answer. I love the second book coming back. How amazing. When we interviewed Amanda Roth in series 1, she spoke about her tendency to mythologize and said that you have it in spades as well. I would agree with that you have this ability to make smooth nuggets out of messy tangential information. Could you comment on that?
That sounds great, but I don't know if I do that as much in terms of mythologizing people.
I think it was events or anything at all.
Right.
It's quite broad.
Okay. Well, the way I understand it is that I think everybody I know has main character energy. Everybody I know could be the lead in a novel or a film in the way that if you pay enough attention, people are endlessly fascinating. So that's one part of it. But I guess there's a part of it that maybe there is a bit of, polishing of stone. It's not conscious. But I do think about people as characters a lot and what their story would be and how I would love to tell that and there's not enough time in a life to do that. I mean, people are always doing things that have these incredible vibrations and come with soundtrack and, Yeah, I'm interested in story. So I guess that's how I understand people, by both the stories they tell and the way they perform in their life, the performative aspect of being them.
Yes. Diversity. You're currently working on a PhD working against whiteness in creative literary production. How important is diverse representation in your work, and how consciously do you place it?
So living in the Northern Territory and being in a community where, as a white woman, I was absolutely in the minority, was a really important experience for me in terms of having my whiteness and my culture exposed to me. There's a whole cultural load and responsibility around, of course, whose story you get to tell and how you find permission and your own agency in terms of telling those stories. I just actually think it's a question of survival. We can't be in this place and not seek to understand each other and think that things will be okay. We have to be so vigilant about the silos that we make for ourselves. And of course, there's risk in reaching outside of them. But what doesn't seem to be accounted for or celebrated is, for the risk, there is infinite reward of relationship and understanding and sharing and reciprocity and respect. And really being gifted with getting to know someone and them sharing their experience and worldview. It's what I want to be doing,
And how do you think it's going generally in creative production?
Okay, it's a really good and really big question. It's complex. In terms of presenting stories in a marketplace or a public space, I think there's a sense that if you don't get it right, they'll come for you, whoever they are, the cultural police. And there's been many examples of the cancel culture is all around us. So there is a responsibility to do your best and to get it right and to decenter yourself in that and to not be the expert in that. But I guess what I hope is opening up more is less defensiveness and more dialogue, because how else do we learn? So if we come with these fully formed ideas and not an openness to be wrong, then I think we're setting ourselves up for failure. So I think there's something about how you enter the public space with story and how you remain open and vulnerable to not getting it right.
Wow. And then there's gender diversity. It's not what it should be. It doesn't feel like the needle has moved enough, even though people are aware of the stats.
There's a lot of lip service. There's a lot of lip service. There are a lot of gatekeepers. The idea of female-led films and knowing what funding gets apportioned to female-led films and who gets to make those films or not. We don't talk about male-led films. Of course. Right? So there is a long way to go. In terms of the energy required to make something and the risk, the personal risk, I think it's around aligning yourself and being energized by the creative risks that your peers and colleagues are taking and finding a kind of camaraderie in that, and that in itself being its own force field, that connecting all of those dots, that constellation, feels really powerful.
I feel that that's what we're doing with this podcast.
I hope so. It's reminding people of the reward in creative risk-taking and pushing, moving, dancing, swimming against the cultural tide and the cultural norm. And it feels alone. It feels utterly overwhelming and often impossible. But with that alignment and with that community, it really feels like we could actually shift culture here. And that's not just about gender or whose stories get to be told. That's shifting culture, in all of its aspects, whether it's capitalism, neoliberalism, misogyny, racism. It's all possible with the force of an energised community.
Well, I feel like you do that extremely well, creating an energised community. And you live well, you find beautiful places to live, you have incredibly high quality relationships, and you live a beautiful life. And anyone who's listened to the podcast will be aware of the deep and respectful relationships that you have with people, many of whom you've worked with, but also have an enduring friendship with. How do you balance writing, which is very solitary, with collaborative work, which you're also clearly drawn to do? And if you had to choose, which one would it be?
I can't do one without the other. I guess I feel that if I had to choose, I would choose my own work, because it's a friction that needs to be satisfied by doing, that inherent urge or itch to make something. I don't think I would be able to live with myself.
Wow.
If I didn't do that, I think I would be a really unhappy person. Collaborative work feels like the cherry on top, the great reward of getting out of your comfort zone and letting some of those, what felt like hard boundaries, sometimes dissolve for something new and more interesting to emerge. So yeah, in Ngukurr especially, I got to collaborate with extraordinarily gifted artists and storytellers and cultural men and women in a way that actually significantly changed me, in terms of the culture I'm from and the literature I've taken in and the films that I love. Well, they all seem to emphasise this idea that you're born alone and you die alone. And that's a very depressing concept to me. And in the space of Ngukurr and that collaborative work, people I worked with come from an understanding that you're born connected and you die connected. And allowing that just to really take me over, came with such an energy and such a feeling of gratitude to be coached in that different way of thinking. And now that I've had some time to really be with it and inhabit it, I see in like a daily way how much better my life is for allowing that to be true. And I think part of a resistance when you come from an individualistic culture is that you feel like people should be responsible for themselves and so solve their own problems, and we need boundaries to be healthy and all of that. And if you acknowledge your connection to other people, it comes with this impossible weight of responsibility. But there's a joy in the responsibility as well. There's a reciprocity. I think that's this incredible cultural value of Indigenous culture in Australia, of giving a generosity that takes a long view, and doesn't expect to necessarily receive the next day, but given in faith that that same generosity will be returned. And I find that so humbling. And yeah, it really floors me, actually.
Is it mainly a mindset, or is it actions, or?
It's in everything. It's truly, truly in everything. I feel like I'm getting into territory of, I'm a white woman who was brought up in an Irish Catholic household and kind of working class family. They were my, early kind of shape forming influences. And I'm not an Indigenous person, so I can't imagine what it is to walk on this country as an Indigenous person, but I can walk alongside an Indigenous person and feel some of that connection through them and through their storytelling and their generosity. And how it feels is that time is not linear and ancestors are present and influential and important. And I love that. And it's kind of an invitation to, it's to take that seriously, to go, you know, even in thinking about going back to Ireland and doing research for my second novel, I feel like my ancestors would be very pleased, you know.
I'm sure they would.
I'd be very pleased. And yeah, that gives me a great feeling of support for what will be difficult, potentially, and confronting work. That, yeah, I'm not this lone person floating out in the ether on a straight line of time. That we, if we're open to it, can feel the support of our ancestors. So that's my experience of it and my understanding of it, with, I guess, wanting to acknowledge my own limits in that, of being able to understand it.
All right. I wanted to talk about vulnerability of putting out work into the world. Charlotte Wood, in our first series, spoke about this so articulately in terms of our primal brain, you know, the need to be part of a tribe, and any difference or something that's going to put you on the edge of that tribe or outside of it is going to mean you're vulnerable to be eaten by lions. You know, the fear of rejection can stop you from putting work out there, I guess. And I love our friend Hattie Dalton spoke about when she made a feature film, said that when she was showing it to her family and friends and so forth, she felt like she was almost like saying, here's my inner vagina, have a good look and let me know what you think. Is that what publishing a book feels like in any way?
Goodness. I love that Hattie said that, but that's not how it feels for me. What it feels like is, well, it's a process. And the process is one of backing myself. And it doesn't end in the sense of, so right now, Hachette are publishing my book in Australia. It will be on the shelves in August. My agent's shopping it to other regions. So say 30 editors in the world currently have a manuscript on their desk with bird on the front cover. I know in the next few weeks and months there's going to be a flurry of thanks but no thanks, because that's just how it goes. And hopefully within that there'll be some resounding wows and yeses. So it's knowing that you can't move out into that space without rejection. That's just part of the deal. I can't be in a place where I'm needing or seeking approval, that work has to have been done. I need to be solid in it before it goes up. So, for example, a publisher in the US was like, you know, great, but didn't love the ending. And I really was like, but the ending's great, you know, felt so firm and proud of the ending. That was like, well, that's easy to let go of. So there's something about, coming back to the belief in the work in the way that I know what I've given it. I know where it's taken me. I know what I've sacrificed. I felt all of those feelings, and the process of putting it out keeps bringing me back to backing myself and finding new ways to do that all the time. Yeah. So
a question, Courtney, that you often ask our interviewees is, who do you reach for when you're looking for inspiration? Who do you reach for?
Look, lately I've been reaching a lot for Valley, my dog. And I feel like she's a really important creature to talk about in terms of how you be alone and be with yourself. There's a certain point in the day where a walk just has to happen, and her paw will come literally onto my hand and she'll be like, enough now, enough. It's time to walk. And I'll be so, you know, thinking I have to keep going and go, of course, that's exactly what we need to be doing. And there's something about really spending time with non-human creatures and finding relationship to open different sensory experiences of being in the forest, and the pleasure she gets from sniffing things, and brings me back to a very grounded, grateful self. I guess I can trip myself over sometimes with my ambition and wanting to fulfill kind of visions of things, and to go, the earth beneath us and the, you know, this place we're in, and how to give that equal attention and respect.
They really add another dimension, don't they?
Truly do. And, you know, if you're not a dog person, there's been times in my life where I haven't had a dog and, you know, my life has still been rich and great. But I think if you know, you know, if you have experienced that, it's an inexplicable relationship.
The title of this podcast, Are You Still Working? I know your Nana Shirley used to ask you, are you still working? Because you don't wear a uniform or have a ute full of tools. All those indicators of profession aren't clear, which clearly can fuel anxiety in nanas who want to see you, who just want to see you with a stable, secure, happy life. What advice would you have for people who want to take a creative career but maybe don't want to stress out their nanas?
So just thinking about Nana Shirley, we found out only a few months ago, my mum ran into someone she'd worked with at the telephone exchange in the 70s, maybe. And Nan's nickname was Whirly Shirley Never Early. And she would race in with a fag coming out of her mouth. And it took me all of this time to wonder about the work she did.
Yeah.
And what that looked like and who she was in that and who she was to her peers.
Whirly Shirley.
Whirly Shirley Never Early. I love that. And what I feel regretful about was that she didn't understand my work and I didn't understand her work. But I'm really interested to know what that was like to listen. She was a telephonist. She listened to other people's conversations.
Amazing.
A lot, right? The world of that. So I think the interest has to be mutual for a start. So that's something I think I'm learning late, you know, that the things that you do daily, how do we get to know that in each other? And then what I just expected her to know what my life was like because I was calling myself a writer, that she should implicitly understand that.
Yeah.
So I think it's being mutual in that curiosity with all love for nanas. Yeah, that's what I would do differently. That was what I wish I'd done, actually. Yeah.
Tell me about Bird. I can't wait to read it.
So Bird is about a young woman who we meet in this present day in Darwin. And she, after a traumatic event, forgets the details of her present life but begins to remember a past life in the Himalayas in a time she can't identify, but a long time ago. So it's a parallel story of her remembering her first life and trying to piece together her present life and really answer the question of how do you break repeating patterns that are awful is the crux of it.
Repeating patterns in herself or her relationships or?
Repeating patterns in herself, in relationships, in events, in circumstances, in her lack of agency, in how young women are treated in society, in her seeking and finding herself locked out of knowledge and institutions because she's a girl.
Are you also talking about intergenerational trauma?
I am. It was a way to do that without, well, you've named it. That's what it is. Yeah. Of how trauma travels down the line and, you know, creates ripples and tsunamis even in the present.
And you talk about surprises in your work. What was one of the surprises that came out as you were writing this?
So years ago, I saw a painting by Georgia O'Keeffe called Evening Star. It's this beautiful, beautiful watercolour. And she did many, many versions of it. And I saw that painting and I responded so physically to it. It was like I'd seen the structure of this novel. And in seeing that, I knew, because it existed in the world and it was just this thing of beauty, allowed myself to believe it was possible to write a book that matched that structure. So for a long time, that image was the guide in terms of how I could tell this story in terms of layers of time. I knew the story was one of connection and I knew it was about Bird and the people in both lifetimes that have been circling her, the same relationships. But without spoiling it, there's a lot that happened that was utterly surprising to me that, yeah, I would say came from Bird.
And Bird is the name of the main character.
Bird is the name of the main character, yeah. She's got spirit, you know, so I love her for that.
As do you, Courtney Collins, as do you. It's an honour and a joy to be your friend and collaborator and to bring all the insight and life lessons about how to live creatively and send that out to an audience is magic. And I just love the notion now that it's a constellation. It's a constellation. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa Madden.
This has been the final episode of Season 2 of Are You Still Working? Follow us on Instagram at Are You Still Working Podcast, or drop us a line if there's anyone you'd like us to interview for the next season of Are You Still Working? Till next time.